Hello and welcome to another episode of Everything Digital Health. Today I'm joined by Tom Stocker, who is a collaborator of mine and a friend who has been working with me on something we call the Clinical Digital Manifesto. So I'll hand over to Tom to introduce himself, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then what is the manifesto?
So I guess this probably tracks back all the way to when I was a naive, wet round the ears medical student, and I was getting my early bits of clinical placement in Manchester, and I was seeing that actually, the difference between at the time Hope Hospital, now Salford, which had really good processes and really nice management, the difference that in terms of the patient impact you had as a clinician in a good context versus a really messy context where people are maybe have a bit more aggro was chalk and cheese. And I was looking at that thinking, oh my goodness, it doesn't matter how good I become as an individual doctor. It's about how the team works together.
Uh-huh.
And that was really the start of my, career. I went out of medicine into management, engineering, doing theatres, outpatient projects, things like this. And then I wound up eventually in the wonderful world of digital, where the promise has been up here and the reality is often, it's sort of down here or middling in terms of what the actual end impact is
Yeah,
to the clinician and the
absolutely
patient. So
recognise that.
that's me. That's been my 15 years in the NHS and exploring those themes in the community, commissioning acutes nationally,
Mm-hmm.
and making some changes there. And increasingly, I've been working with digital teams and clinical teams to change ways in which they get stuff done with digital and with pathways and with processes. And while doing that work, I was really excited to meet you when I first met you, because it just like you have this kind of GP kind of perspective and lens, and you've been thinking about these things so much longer than I have, and I've learned a lot from you basically. So thanks for having me on.
Oh,
And
no problem.
the manifesto, from my perspective, is born out of this desire to change the narrative a bit in terms of how we do digital, how we empower care teams, how we get people working together. And yeah, excited to kind of talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we first got chatting about the idea of clinical digital misery. That's what really I thought that is absolutely what it is. I think that was one of yours that you coined, and it was just like the idea that we all the time we have got teams that are hampered by the digital stuff that they're using. So what we'd want to have is like NHS teams that can get on with doing their clinical work and essentially are supercharged by the digital stuff that's behind them. And while there might be pockets of that in areas of good practice or one good hospital or one good system,
For sure.
it's definitely not the norm. And we coined this term of like clinical digital misery, which is where most people are living, where, they go and do their job and then the writing that stuff into the clinical system takes you 3 times as long as doing the thing. That is what clinical drag, slowing you
How long
down
it
all the
takes to
time.
prescribe, if you now have product-based EPMA, how long it takes to order an X-ray or a
Yeah.
CT scan, how long it takes to hand someone over internally or refer them or transfer a ward. You think about how much time a nurse plus a doctor plus a reg is doing to coordinate that and safeguard that handover to be warm, and it should be compliant, but it just seems a lot harder than the old days of paper. When you digitize
Yeah.
paper, you can go through the form in a very kind of careful way, and actually the GUI, as I call it, or the front end of a lot of these systems I think it's getting better. I think AI is really making a difference, but there are some systems people are living with and in that are just a nightmare. And
Yeah.
I would hate to have been one of those clinicians that had to use those systems every day.
Oh, God,
Um,
I know the feeling of having to do that. Luckily, I mean, in general practice, it's slightly better, but I definitely felt the pain. I was a locum A&E doctor for a long time. I was an anaesthetist before that, and I was, did all my sort of normal jobs as part of my GP training across obs and gynae and paediatrics and general medicine. And like I've worked in most areas of hospitals. And yeah, some of the systems you've got to use are appalling compared with paper. And that's something that as digital people, we should never have to say. We should never be saying it was better in some places when you had paper. But I guarantee there are clinicians feeling that. And the manifesto really is all about it's validating that thought. It's like saying it's not you that's the problem as a clinician. Mm-hmm. And join the manifesto. Talk about the manifesto. Come and help us build it.
Because actually we're living in a world where this doesn't need to be the case, right? We've got this amazing technology explosion. We've got LLMs. We've got front-end design practices that have built up around industry and government in other areas. It's just, for whatever reason, be that politics, coordination, EPR supplier market, the way that hospitals are run and structured, like we're learning like why, and maybe we should go into that later, but for whatever reason, the NHS is called the land that design forgot by designers. That's our name.
Wow.
And you can see it and you can feel it when you walk around a hospital.
Totally.
So I think that's our so let's go to the CDM problem statement, right? This is something that we developed at Rewired with a load of clinicians and digital people. I'm just going to read it out.
Yeah.
Clinicians across the NHS are faced with time-consuming digital workflows that often lead to frustration and wasted time. We believe, as a group, that poor software, sloppy design, inadequate implementation, insufficient optimization, and uninspired training and support are all contributing to a subpar experience for our staff and our patients. So much so that it exerts a noticeable drag on our clinical work, disengages our workforce, and also hampers our ability to deliver care sustainably across NHS services. That's the problem we're solving as a group.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of clinicians out there who will recognise that. And we've put it very politely, but I can imagine that there are less polite ways of describing that. Yeah, I think that it's a problem. It's also, it's the kind of problem that if you are a clinician and you complain about the computer system or something, there's probably a lot of people you could complain to locally at your trust or whatever, and they'll all go, yeah, shit, into it. You know, that sort of almost like peer support of we're all in this together, but the systems are against us. But we want to go past that and get into the area where we can band together to actually change this. And so Tom and I thought the best way to do that would be articulate what we're talking about as a manifesto. And so we got that problem statement on that website, which I'll share in the show notes. We've talked about why we think that it's a problem and why we think it's something we can change. And then we've just put out 5 points of a manifesto. And like, if we could move everybody towards thinking in those terms that we've put in those 5 points, we will, as a kind of output of that over years, we will get better tech just by doing those things. So, I mean, shall we just move on and go straight into the manifesto points?
100%. I hope it's familiar for clinicians. You know, think about the stroke pathway 20 years ago versus today. People like Tony Rudd have put principles, disciplines, KPIs around services, and that's really helped services to perform. And we're really talking about the same sort of thing for digital. So yeah, let's do it. The Clinical Manifesto.
The Clinical Digital Manifesto, yeah. So number 1, we look to NHS care teams as our leaders of digital design. So I'm not going to read out the individual, like all the blurb for it, because we're going to talk about it. But I encourage you to go to the website and have a look, you know, and for people who are curious. We have a forum as well, and I'll put a link to that, and that's how you get involved. But yeah, we look to the NHS teams. They know what they're doing with their clinical work. Design and tech is a service specialty. It's there to serve somebody else. It's not an end in itself. We should be building tech that gets out of the way of the clinicians and gives them superpowers. I want them to be able to do things that they weren't able to do without the digital assistance. It should feel like computer assisted human all the way. Yeah.
The second is to listen to feedback. So feedback is the lifeblood of digital as a set of skills. And there are things that get in the way of a jobbing clinician or care team at the front line getting that feedback expressed, articulated well, and then fed to the right people. So that's the second point.
Yeah, 100%. So like, we alluded to it a little bit earlier. It's very difficult to get your clinical feedback into the ears of somebody who can do something about it. You're disempowered, you're very busy, you have a lot of clinical workload, and I know from personal experience, trying to escalate even a serious clinical safety issue, you'll be told you're doing it wrong, you're the user and you're not been trained properly, are you really senior enough to raise an issue? And I mean, that's a really problematic one, I think, in the NHS. The hierarchical structure makes it feel that, for example, if you're a junior doctor or even a medical student, your voice is not wanted at departmental meetings. Your voice is not heard at senior levels in the NHS, even though you're the one operating some of this stuff. And you might have a better experience of using it than the more senior people. And yet your voice is explicitly removed from feedback. So we got to transform that completely. Feedback needs to be ubiquitous. It needs to be listened to and acted upon, and then fed back to the people who fed back. So you said this, we did this, you now have a better system. What do you think of it? Keep going round. That's what it's got to be,
I've definitely worked in NHS organisations, Marcus, where that is absolutely happening. But we can always get better. I mean, these organisations are so big. There are so many users. And there's a lot that can be done to proactively go and listen to those voices, to articulate them well. And even if we're not in control of all of our software as an organisation, there's a way of working with the contract, working with the supplier to make sure that people that can change some of this are able to. That the boundaries are always being pushed. You don't want to be kind of resting on your laurels with software, because it should follow the information patterns in an organisation. And this, we listen to feedback. It will help you engage your staff. It will help you achieve your objectives with digital. It should be a real win-win here.
It should be, yeah. And it's something we can encourage suppliers to do, and we can, gravitate towards the suppliers that are best at listening to feedback, or perhaps even go and find their own feedback and pull that into their systems.
Yeah.
So number 3, we achieve a user experience with every digital solution that NHS clinicians can work with.
So we had a lot of debate about how we worded this, didn't we? Do you remember?
Yeah.
There were people in the room saying, no, it can't just be a solution that we work with. We need a golden experience. We need it to be fantastic.
Yeah.
And then we had CIO kind of voices in the room going, well, hold on. Because in reality, that might not be achievable. So we've got this can work with. And I think that concept's loose enough to work for most situations, whereby software's there to help you work as a care team. Clinical software, that's the point. So if you can't work with it, that's a bit of a line in the sand, really, that we should draw. We should really be making sure as an NHS that every system out there is workable. Yeah. And I'm not sure that's where we are today.
I think you're right. And how you define whether it's workable is for debate, but I think one way you could test it is we need to compare it to what was there before, but we very carefully need to not blame the users when a system is bad. So a general conversation when a new system is introduced would go like, here's the new system, and the users complain and they say it's making us 3 times slower than when we used paper, and the owners of that system will blame the users and say that's because you haven't been trained, you're not good enough at computers, blame digital literacy, which I think is getting a weaker and weaker argument as generations go by that are, digital natives and really confident with computers. And yet the systems are unworkable. We tend to blame people a lot for not being good enough users, rather than blaming the system for not being a good enough system.
And the trick here is turning the NHS from the land that design forgot to the land that made design better. So we have these amazing
Well,
practices across professions, across services, where we are evidence-based. We think about different types of data. We think about trials. This is all needed for digital. This is an objective question. Is the team working better than it was or should be? Is it working as well as it needs to work? And what's the role of the software in that question? And there are objective data points from software data, from user feedback. There are methodologies to capture all that and work with that and understand it, that we want to bring into the NHS and adapt to the NHS. Because if you take some of this design stuff for web or government or banking or whatever, and we take it straight into the NHS, it often falls apart because the NHS care team's job is so complex in terms of process, information management, diagnosis, treatment, that the standard design package can struggle, and standard designers can really struggle to click with the clinical world. So we appreciate that, but we still think it's just worth having a real go at this and being more objective and more grown up about, is this software acceptable given the
yeah,
task, given the people, given the resources, and given the importance of information gaps, failures, wasted time. These
yeah,
aren't trivial things. They will affect your auntie's heart, problem. They will affect your brother's drinking problem. They will affect your children's mental health. What we do matters, and that needs to be reflected in the way that we organize our digital solutions.
absolutely. And it has to be okay for the answer to be, this solution is not acceptable, just as much as it's okay for it to be the answer, this solution is acceptable. Because I think at the moment, where feedback does exist, there's often a bit of an unseen hand that says, look, we announced this as a major program of work, reputations are at stake, the trust's overall view and its standing is at stake. We've spent a lot of money on it, procurements have happened, money has been spent, and the idea of receiving feedback that says this is not acceptable becomes uncontemplatable. No one wants to contemplate the idea that, having done all that, it's bad. It has to be okay for us to say this is not an acceptable solution.
And
Not that we will.
What we should be doing in the Clinical Digital Manifesto, this isn't just clinicians, this is digital people like me and clinicians. And
Exactly.
one of the things that us on the management side need to do is we need to bring to bear supply chain management, negotiation, like how we design and articulate requirements,
Standards,
back-end designs, technical architecture. There's skills here that are used across the world. So we need to bring those skills to bear. So it's not this black and white decision of, oh, should we roll back? Is it safe? That's the wrong question. The question is, like, we know we now have an objective, which is to improve how this team is working and the software they're using. What's the best way to achieve that? And it might be that working with existing suppliers, changing the contract and how it's managed, encouraging them and really leaning on them as a public sector organization to go, do you know what, guys? You can do better than this. Why don't you bring in some development time? There's ways and means that we can get to better. We might not be able to get to, someone's ideal perfect of how they want to work in the team, but we can get a lot better, and better matters. That's why the group's here.
100%. And I think that we can make it easier for suppliers to make better stuff by making it clearer what we want. Because I think that's one thing that we're not very good at articulating in a way that gets through to suppliers. And this is not about supplier bashing, because I think the suppliers are on our side of the, we want them to be part of the manifesto.
They're asking us every week, aren't they, Marcus? What can we do to improve value? We don't know what our clients want. They shouldn't be 100%. Asking that question of us. They should be having a very deep and mature conversation with each of their clients. So, yeah, definitely.
Okay. Number 4, we will bring the NHS into the open modern computing era.
This feels very Marcus. This one. This is because you're so much a developer as well as a clinician. Why don't you explain this for the
Okay, yeah, I'll
audience?
take this one. So there is so much out there in what I call, slightly offensively, the real tech world, as in not the NHS. And as person, I mean, I'm a doctor that's turned developer kind of thing. And so that meant I went out into the tech world and had to learn a lot. And one of the things about doing that is that you see how things are done and you go, oh, that's a good way of doing it. Why don't we do that in the NHS? And pulling that idea into the NHS is sometimes all that's needed. That's all you need to do, is to sort of pull that idea, because like, you don't need to invent new good stuff in the NHS is what I'm saying. All we need to do is go and see what the rest of the tech world are doing and bring some of those good ideas in. So like open source infrastructure, for example, lots of infrastructural components of the NHS digital world kind of thing could and should be open source. And that would raise the level for everybody kind of thing. So, and as an example, like an open source patient administration system, that you build that once, you allow trusts to use it across the NHS, and that immediately would start to bring up the standard of that system, and you'd retire crusty old systems that we're paying a lot of money for. Open source infrastructure could also be things like client libraries for connecting to NHS infrastructure, such as the spine, sort of more basic level things. Another area where you can get a lot of standardization through open source is in the user interface. So if you look at the way that the tech world has standardized its user interfaces, it has, but it's done it in a very unusual way. Nobody wrote a global law that says you must use a small image of a bin for a delete icon. But that is actually what we'd call a convention now. How did we all end up doing that convention? Well, it kind of makes sense, but also there are libraries out there that make it really easy to add a set of icons and a set of buttons and some structure to the web page. These are things like Twitter Bootstrap, that was one of the early ones, but Foundation, Zerb, and there are loads of these user interface frameworks, as they're called.
Well, famously, what about GDS? So Government Digital Services is an inspiration for what we're doing here.
Yeah.
From people like Kit Collingwood and others that were developing a network of people across departments to come together informally to work through these kind of capability and know-how, questions alongside this central government strategy to go, do you know what? We want one website tooling that's going to look and feel the same, whether you're applying for a driving license or a passport or reporting an incident. And
that's
they've
been
got
super
the same
successful.
radio buttons.
Yeah.
They build it once, they use it many, many, many times. And we that would help people like me who want to engage a clinical team and like, okay, what do you need? Let's build it. It would help me so much if there was an NHS design pattern where I could do a web tool using that, and then it fed straight into the EPRs. But we're already using open source. We're often unaware. So when we connect to lots of third-party systems with interoperability, we're using things like OAuth 2, which has been in the native digital world for probably 10, 20 years before it hit the NHS, but we're just starting to use that.
And we still don't have it properly in the NHS. I mean, where is the button that says log in with my NHS ID, essentially like log in with NHS Mail? And my friend Kevin Monk, he's somebody who's been on the show a couple of weeks back, and he mentioned this as like, that is the biggest piece of low-hanging fruit across the whole NHS, is given that we all have an NHS.net account, or majority have that, why isn't there a similar a button like the same as log in with Gmail kind of thing, but log in with my NHS.net? And crucially, that doesn't give the application access to your email. It just means that you have the ability to sign in as an NHS member of staff, and you can then log in. Imagine if every system just had that button. So once you were logged into any web browser with your NHS.net account to check your email, all of your other logins would just hang off that. That would save an incredible amount of time. It would make it easier for suppliers to integrate that, because they would just say, right, we'll do the NHS login thing. We don't need to keep separate passwords. We don't need to do any of that kind of stuff.
Some of the best trusts I've worked with have used things like Dashlane and SSO suppliers to solve this problem themselves.
Yes.
Across. So once you log in, you're fine and you can go. I've seen that done well, and I've seen that done whereby it isn't quite good enough to solve the user experience problem as well.
I have seen
and
it.
And
then
then there are other trusts where they haven't done it at all still. So I think this is one of those things where we're spending a lot of money on an organisation by organisation basis. But if we got the technical architecture right through a national team like Frontline Productivity, and we could upskill those national teams in some digital basics across industry and the developer community, we'd save, like, the business case for that's extremely attractive. There's no massive project, but we're saving on average 100K per trust across the country with a few clicks of some buttons, you know. It's not quite that simple. You need standards, you need coordination, you need supply contracts, but it's well within our capability as an NHS to get that to happen.
100%. And the user experience would be phenomenally better. And just to complete the thought, I was talking about frameworks, UI frameworks, because I realized I didn't really connect it to how you would use that in the NHS. So we've got some degree of ubiquity and familiarity in the web just by the existence of these user interface frameworks. No one's paying them to use those frameworks, and no one is forcing them legally to use those frameworks. But a startup that wants to do a new application would be mad to do anything other than use an existing framework, because it just gets you to a good-looking website much faster. That's the business case. It's basically, you'd be mad not to. And we need to get the NHS like that, so that if you're a new supplier and you're building a system, we have toolkits with all the bits that you'd need to build an NHS clinician-facing application as user interface fragments that you can just use. And building your own would take you 100 times longer and cost you 1,000 times as much. So you wouldn't. No one would do that. We wouldn't need to have any legislation. We wouldn't need to put it into contracts. We'd just make it so good that you'd be mad not to use it. And the idea goes back to like the common user interface, the CUI, which was a Microsoft thing that the NHS paid them to develop during the National Project for IT. Crucially, they never released that as a framework of like web tools, even though the web was very established at the time. This is in the mid 2000s. That's what was always needed. In 2019, they deprecated the CUI and they didn't replace it. And that was a sad day, because we should have had the NHS user interface toolkit instead. And I guarantee that's a thing, you know, that is another massively low hanging fruit. If we did that, we'd have ubiquitous buttons that mean the same thing in every system. And you'd have that appeal of familiarity, you know, when you'd go to a new hospital, and you'd be able to work the system because the button that does this in this system is the same everywhere, you know?
Do you know what I wonder, Marcus? I wonder how often I hear a lot from clinicians who don't do as much in digital but are frustrated by their EPRs or whatever. Like, why can't we just have one EPR across the whole NHS? I think what they're really, like, half of what they're asking for, some of it is the information, having the information there for all patients. But I think some of what they're asking for is that familiarity, not having to relearn, spend 3 days in the first few weeks of a job, like just learning how to process core bits of information and tasks in an EPR, how to search, how to use documents. And it's often different in different sites. So I think there's something there.
I think that is what they're asking for, is ubiquity. And another example that I trot out every so often is driving a car. When we learn to drive a car, with a small number of sort of moderate variations, most cars have the same interface. It's a steering wheel and it's 3 pedals or 2 pedals, and there's a handbrake, and you know, there's a few things, but really there's a small number of critical interfaces, and they're always the same. And when you turn the steering wheel to the left, the car goes to the left, right? But imagine if that wasn't the case and every car had a completely different interface, where, like, just like the NHS. Every hospital you go to has a completely different interface. You wouldn't be that surprised if there were accidents, constantly happening because people had got a new car and they'd forgotten that the brake pedal's on the other side in this car. That's not allowed.
Have you seen that World War II airplane design thing? Did you ever come across that famous design trope where I can't remember, one of the American aircraft manufacturers changed the landing gear button for another button, and it meant that there were suddenly a whole rash of crashes for these poor tired bombers coming back to land, thinking they'd clicked the landing gear release button, and they hadn't, because it looked exactly the same. So there's this is the reality of switching a trust as a clinician.
100%. And it's a very tired analogy, the sort of aviation safety, medical safety one, but it's really important. I think I want to keep that going, that analogy, because people die in aircrafts, but when they die, the pilot dies and 200 or 300 other people die, and it's a big news item. But many more people are dying every day through medical mistakes, and it's like the third largest cause of death after cancer and heart disease or something like that is medical error, and that is not a news item. It just keeps on happening, and often these errors get blamed on individuals. So a user interface is changed, a system makes an error, but the individual who's the operator is the accountability sink, and they're the person who gets to take the full force of of whatever consequences occur, and it's moving the bomber landing gear. We've caused that error through a systematic failing, but we blame it on an individual. There's a great video.
Black and white safety failure at that end, but I would say most of this isn't there, because clinicians are very good accountability points, and they worry and they think and they have workarounds and they save people. But there's this whole grey area of, well, we could have seen people in a different order, which meant that they got treatment sooner and they got treatment later, and that would have been better. So there's this, that's the tip from my point of view, yes, and that's the tip of the iceberg.
100%.
In terms of all the small harms and missed opportunities that are added up when you think about how challenging it is for care teams and clinicians to see the information, see the right bits of information, plan the next steps of someone's care journey effectively, organize around that, liaise, efficiently, all these things you need to do in a care team. Software is and should be there to help, and this manifesto, I hope, starts to make a difference, not through what we do, Marcus, but through new members, through
building a movement,
new people in care teams across the country or in digital teams across the country who want to put some serious thought to this and work together with others who are doing the same.
And it's nothing new. I mean, everybody will have had thoughts like this, but what we're hoping to do is to try and organise just behind those 5 manifesto points and get people to make a change. In time, we might need a 6th or 7th manifesto point, but for now, we need the community. That's what needs to happen.
Which takes us to our 5th one, right?
To the 5th one.
Develop the capabilities of digital teams in the NHS.
Absolutely.
So points 1 to 4 are all really demanding on a digital team. Digital teams are stretched. They're working hard. They're pulling long shifts. They're going into the night. They're waking up early. They're turning up. They're listening to people. They're doing their best as an often very challenged middle point between frontline expectations, program logic, exec drivers and strategy, national funding that doesn't quite fit what they need, and of course the supplier ecosystem, which I know does want to often do better, but is often presenting problems through a sales layer back to a digital colleague, rather than being really transparent about what the technical possibilities are for their product in a particular deployment. There's too much commercial kind of challenge in that translation gap. So if you add all that up together, what we're asking for is for a digital team to be working quite differently, for suppliers to be working quite differently, for an organization to treat their digital team quite differently. So to make points 1 to 4 work, and on its own, because it's a great thing, we are here to help develop the capabilities of digital teams and digital professionals across the NHS. And that's actually quite a lot of what we've been doing. And the methodologies we've come up with around integration,
Yeah.
how to do design, like workshop methods, stuff that we've already done, like how, like we did this great thing with one of our members who's got digital experience and experience as a GP around the role of a clinical safety officer in the context of digital and how that should be the whole quality triangle. The
Yeah.
CNIO, CCIO, clinical safety officer, don't be pigeonholed only into safety. Your job has the skills and the opportunity to address efficiency and to address effectiveness. And when we pigeon off safety for the CXIOs and then, like efficiency for the digital program manager, and those aren't one coordinated decision, how is design going to work? How are we going to be able to listen to care teams? How are we going to think about technology differently? No way. So we've got a revolution coming, Marcus, haven't we? With
We
AI, new
have.
coding methods, like things are going cheaper and faster in the software space.
Totally.
And at the same time, we've got an industry, NHS, that's kind of calcified around a load of purchasing that happened in the last 10 years, run out of money, and are tired managing that as BAU. We've still got this gap that is improving in some areas, some great bright spots across the NHS around how we address the needs of NHS care teams. And this is what I'm actually probably most excited about today with the Clinical Digital Manifesto. It's this capability development with the digital teams so they understand that whole picture and can work differently with services to unlock the problems that we've just been talking about for an hour.
Yeah. I think the AI can save the NHS, but not in the way people think. So this huge hype around AI is often about, we're going to procure software products at great expense that have some kind of embedded AI feature in there, and that will be in the clinical path. That AI, clinical data is going through the AI, and somehow magically something happens. Now, I think there are tiny areas where that might be good, where there's pockets of that being safe and effective. But that's not what I think is going to happen. The real way that the NHS can be saved by AI is the dramatic lowering of software development costs by agentic coding. And so you still need software developers. You still need people who know how to architect and build systems at scale. But the amount of time it takes to then build those systems has dropped dramatically just in the last few months, really. And I think that is what the game changer is. Now, critically, you have to be in a position to exploit that. And if you're procuring software from other people, you are not in a position to exploit it. We actually need to have in-house systems. We need to have in-house teams in order to get ourselves in a position where...
Let me challenge that. Can I challenge that?
Okay, sure, yeah.
So, number one, the way that we've worked with suppliers in the past doesn't need to be the way that the NHS works with suppliers in the future. So this thing of, here's a functional requirement, tick, 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 user acceptance, but you're not asking the user what they actually think. You're just asking them, does it do this thing that they said they would do? Yeah. And then that kind of passive, okay, you want this built, chuck us 15 grand or 5 grand or 500 quid, and we'll put some developers on it and they'll go through change control. I think there's a totally different way of structuring contracts and requiring behaviors from your supplier dev teams. And maybe they're using the AI and they're doing the cheap coding, but you can put them into kind of design and fix sprints for the version of the product that you've got in your hospital. There's all sorts of different ways of working that we haven't explored. So the supplier might still be the space, but ideally it's supervised by digital colleagues that know how to code. I think the second challenge is on the agentic or vibe coding quality. So I know it's getting a lot better in the last few months, but what I would prefer to see today, and maybe in 5 years this is different, 2 years this is different, is people using tools like Lovable or Claude to mock up what they are trying to ask for. No design specs, no requirements documents.
Perfectly reasonable ask, yeah.
Just spend a few hours with Lovable and use that code base to show people this is what I wanted. I wanted search. I wanted documents to be done in this way. I wanted things to hang together. I wanted it to be purple. Like, forget putting that in a document. Play around with Lovable and AI and all this stuff and mock up a wireframe. It now just takes a few hours and it's free, whereas before it took 10 days of a designer's time. So I think, you know, Figma and all this. So I think that what the last step of let's publish this into a clinical situation, I don't think I'm clear on how to do that safely yet, because when I've looked at Claude builds, there's soup in there, there's vulnerability points, there's overly complex bits of code when it's used Node React or whatever that I've had a look at. I'm not a developer, but I've seen enough in there to go, ooh, I wouldn't want clinical data on that. So I think it'll get there, but I think that the role of a lead dev and a back-end dev in this endeavor to check that the code is
100%.
secure, it's efficient, it works. That's not something a hospital can do without if they're going on an agentic journey.
Oh, completely. You know, you need people to understand the code that's been written, and it needs to be safe. It's got to pass the guardrails that you have. But I think this is where an area that we don't do at the moment, you know, the clinical safety process is not done using software tests, for example. You know, we, as a clinical safety officer, you are not helping to write test frameworks that prove that the software is safe as it's manufactured, as it were. We do that as a separate process later on, and it's a very waterfall process. It's very time consuming. We could get to the point where you've got clinical safety requirements as code almost, and that would be an amazing place to be at, where you could wrap a test harness around a piece of software and say, this is our flows of patient care that we need to verify that when you do this, it does this, and they can be automated so that you don't have to have a human checking those scripts. You have an automatic system. So it's like, I clicked on these buttons and fuzz testing, and there's all kinds of stuff you can do to augment the power of a clinical safety officer and make it faster, so that that has to be done, really. If we're to realise proper agile development in the NHS, so that you might be shipping a new version of a clinical software every day, for example, in order to test for regressions, to make sure there's no clinical regression there, you have to have automated clinical safety officer as well. So that doesn't mean replace them. That means give them the tools to build executable clinical safety tests.
So can I just explain something for listeners? Just to check. So this is 15-plus-year-old technology that's used across all of development, automated front-end testing. So you set up robots, and a lot of this automated testing is done by teams that have standard workflows of testing for. So in banking, I can make a transfer, I can make a payment, I can see my statement, I can download a thing, I can log in. You know, like those I can statements, there's going to be times 100 for the NHS. But what I see at the moment is we are bringing in clinicians into testing with no prior expertise in testing. And we're expecting them just to reinvent the wheel in every test situation on what they need to do as a clinician. And if you think about clinicians' jobs, I need to order a diagnosis. I need to prescribe. I need to screen. I need to, you know, the I need to statements, the jobs to be done in software development speak are gargantuan. So I think there's this massive opportunity that we've got for automated testing to get the same set of requirements. I need to do a pre-op assessment. I need to launch a prom questionnaire. None of these are going to be unique to any particular organization. So why aren't we doing it once for all?
Yeah,
It's just there's just so much here where we've got this transition that needs to take place, and that's what our manifesto is about. That requires coordination. At the moment, you can't go from 0 to 100 with everything that we're saying, but when we get there, a huge proportion of what your average digital team member is doing on a day-to-day basis gets done automatically. It becomes
Yeah,
redundant. And all of that time, capacity, and resource is freed up to get closer to the needs of the people at the front line and to solve more problems. So I'm really excited about where we take this. And we've got about 50 members so far
yeah,
who are coming. We've got a quarterly call, which is open, called an open meet. The members set the agenda of what we talk about and what we discuss. We've got these principles for working together. We're open to anyone who's committed to our manifesto and making it a reality in the NHS.
yeah.
You've got a forum, Marcus, you've kindly done for us. There's a little tiny bit of vetting to make sure you are NHS friendly, but then come on the forum, you can see our assets, our documents, our thinking, our
Yeah,
discussion.
get involved.
We that's the second point. We share our work and progress openly and regularly, and we seek feedback on what we're doing. We want to live by the principles that we're asking that the health system adopts for digital. The third one is that we really respect each other's commitments and boundaries. So lots of our members, most of our members, are already overachieving and feel lots of responsibility in their day-to-day jobs as clinicians or as managers or even as both. So when we work together, there's just this thing about remembering that this is not the day job, this is a voluntary thing on top, and we need to respect people's boundaries.
Exactly.
Fourth, we look for opportunities to support each other, have fun, and help where we can. Fifth, we're not looking to replace loads of the fantastic networks already there. So Skills Development Network, amazing, HL7, Fire, Open EPR, great stuff. We are not doing what they're doing. We're not doing what FedIp's doing. We are doing something different, which
Yeah,
is a peer-to-peer support network. We're developing assets. We're filling gaps, and we're independent. So we're not sponsored by anyone, and we are starting to offer membership to NHS trusts, and they're taking us up on that. But we're not taking corporate sponsorship. But there's no bias. There's no supplier angle
that's
here.
it.
And we don't make a profit. So we use any income or donations to advance our manifesto. So that's how we work. If that sounds interesting to you, email us, go on the website, fill out the form, sign
I'll
up.
make sure all those links are in the show notes in the description, and so
Yeah.
you can go to our forum, you can join the forum, you can sign up there. There are a couple of different ways to get involved, I guess the most important thing is share the existence of the Clinical Digital Manifesto with colleagues. So if you know other people who've got the same frustrations, is that tell them about it, so that the most important thing is getting the momentum of everybody knowing about this thing, and we can line up more and more clinicians, more and more patients, more and more managers, suppliers. Everybody can be behind this because it's all good stuff. It will result in good things, and we can make it happen using the sort of people power sort of thing.
There's a world in which we stay fragmented, our heads stay down, we stay within the four walls of our individual organizations and teams, and progress is grindingly slow times 300 organizations.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's a world in which we stop looking up and down and we look sideways. We look to the other people doing our jobs across the NHS and different organizations. We share patterns, we share learning, we share progress. We're there for each other. We provide support. And together, we open up this new world of possible options of how we do our jobs. And that shifts the landscape for people at the top and people at the bottom. And that's really what we're about. So please sign up and just give it a go.
Awesome. I could not have said it better. I think that's a perfect thing to end on. Thank you, Tom, for joining us. Really excited for the future of the Clinical Digital Manifesto. Really excited to work with you on this and make it better. Let's go.
Thanks for having me on, Marcus.